We had a suicide here not too long ago, a few miles away in Coronado, at the old Wrigley Mansion. A nice young woman hung herself. Before she did that, she took all her clothes off, tied her hands behind her back, tied her feet together, and apparently gagged herself with an old shirt. At least that's what the official report said, that it was suicide. Her parents don't think it was suicide because they said, for one reason, her religion would suggest that she goes straight to hell automatically if she's a suicide. The 18th century English philosopher David Hume asked an important question. He said, what kind of God would create someone capable of committing suicide? The only creatures on the planet, mind you, that are capable of committing suicide, and then punish him or her if they chose to do so. Stoics would agree with that. They don't believe in gods that play tricks or mind games. Nature created reason. And whereas we never have encouraged suicide, we say that there may be reasons, perfectly good reasons, why suicide may be appropriate. For example, if a person is in intense pain and there's no relief in sight, probably never will be, suicide might be okay then. Another time may be if you have an uncontrollable addiction. It used to be the only uncontrollable addiction was alcohol. Now there are many different ways you can have an uncontrollable addiction. And very often not only are you living a terrible life for yourself, but everyone around you also has to suffer. That might be a good time to consider suicide. Another situation is for those morally compromised. Those people who have uncontrollable lusts that repeatedly cause pain both to themselves and others. Rapists, pedophiles, torturers, sadists of all kinds. Of course, they're not likely to do that, but it might be a better world if they would commit suicide. Then there are the rationally compromised, those people who are brain dead, and hopefully they've filled out an advanced directive that tells the medical personnel that they can pull the plug if there's no hope of ever regaining their rational consciousness again. I suppose various forms of dementia might be included here, such as Alzheimer's. And then there are the altruists. You know, the people who will jump into an icy river to save someone with the very real possibility that they may lose their own life in doing so. Probably the most famous contemporary Stoic would be Admiral James Stockdale. He was an altruist. When he was a young Navy flyer in the Vietnam War, he was shot down very early on in that war, and he was kept mostly in solitary confinement for 7 years, tortured repeatedly. He had great propaganda value for the Viet Cong because he was the ranking officer in captivity at that time. So they wanted to make videos of him for propaganda purposes. So he cut his head all up to prevent that. Well, they just covered it and put a cap on him. So he took a stool and he bashed himself in the face and around the head until he was so swollen up he was unrecognized. They gave up on the propaganda idea. Later, when it was found that there was information amongst the other captives there, the other Americans in captivity, he knew they were going to torture him, and he had information that would implicate some of his fellow troops. And so he slit his wrists in an attempt to commit suicide rather than confess and get others in trouble. Well, they found him before he bled out, and he survived. In fact, he lived out his life in Coronado after that. He became a 3-star admiral, He became probably the most decorated officer in the history of the United States Navy. Became a vice presidential candidate. He lived into his 80s, eventually died of Alzheimer's. Coronado really is a very nice little town.